People said the woman in the black gown looked like a ghost, but Damien Whitmore knew better. Ghosts didn't come back with lawyers, private security, and controlling shares in your company. The rain hammered against the cliffs outside Blackthorn Ridge Resort like fists against glass the night Vivian Blake Monroe disappeared. 30,000 feet below the winding mountain road, the Pacific crashed against jagged rocks hidden beneath darkness and fog. Lightning split the sky for half a second, illuminating the edge of the cliff where a silver wedding ring spun across wet stone before slipping into the void below. Damien Cole Whitmore stood perfectly still in the storm, his expensive charcoal coat soaked through, his breathing calm despite the chaos around him. Somewhere beneath the canyon mist, Vivian's scream vanished into the roaring wind. Then came silence, the kind of silence that changes lives forever. Damien lowered his shaking hand slowly, staring over the cliffside as rainwater streamed down his face. To anyone watching from a distance, he might have looked devastated, heartbroken, a husband frozen by tragedy. But there was no grief in Damien's eyes, only calculation. Behind him, headlights cut through the storm. A white Mercedes SUV pulled onto the overlook, tires crunching over wet gravel. Sabrina Vale Kensington stepped out carefully, shielding her designer coat from the rain as her high heels clicked sharply against the pavement. Even in the middle of a thunderstorm, she looked flawless. Blonde hair tucked neatly beneath a cream hood, diamond earrings catching flashes of lightning. Her eyes moved toward the cliff edge, then back to Damien. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. Damien didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the cuffs of his soaked shirt with mechanical precision, the same way he did before multi-million-dollar board meetings. "There was an accident," he finally said. Sabrina glanced toward the darkness below. "And no one saw?" Another flash of lightning illuminated the canyon. Damien's jaw tightened. No one. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain kept falling. Cold. Endless. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled through the mountains like a warning too late to matter. 3 hours earlier, Vivian had believed this trip would save her marriage. Blackthorn Ridge had been their anniversary destination once before, back when Damien still reached for her hand in public and kissed her forehead without checking who was watching. She had spent 40 minutes choosing a navy blue dress that morning, hoping he might finally look at her the way he used to. Instead, he spent the entire drive answering calls from investors while Sabrina's perfume lingered faintly on the collar of his coat. Vivian noticed everything. The lipstick stain hidden beneath rainwater. The second phone vibrating in the glove compartment. The life insurance documents she accidentally found 2 weeks earlier while searching for tax records. Damien had increased her policy to $10 million just 6 months before. At dinner, the piano music drifting through the luxury lodge could not drown out the tension sitting between them like broken glass. Vivian tried anyway. "We can still fix this," she whispered softly over untouched wine and candlelight. Damien looked at her for a long moment before leaning back in his chair. Cold eyes. Empty eyes. "You stopped being part of my future a long time ago, Vivian." The words hit harder than the storm outside. But she still followed him to the overlook after dinner when he suggested they talk privately. She still believed there was something left worth saving. That was her final mistake. Now the canyon swallowed every trace of her. And Damien Whitmore walked back toward his car believing the past had finally disappeared beneath the rain. By sunrise, every major news station in California was calling it a tragic accident. The footage played on silent loops across television screens inside airport lounges, diners, and downtown office buildings. Rain. Police lights. Yellow tape fluttering beside the cliffs at Blackthorn Ridge Resort. Then a photograph of Vivian Blake Monroe smiling beside her husband at a charity gala 6 months earlier, her soft features glowing beneath crystal chandeliers, while Damien Whitmore stood beside her looking polished and untouchable. Authorities continue. Searching the canyon below after severe weather conditions interrupted rescue operations overnight. The female anchor paused dramatically before lowering her voice. At this time, officials believe there is little chance of survival. Damien watched the broadcast from the 42nd floor of Whitmore Global Headquarters with one hand wrapped around a glass of bourbon. Manhattan gray clouds pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, while financial analysts argued softly outside the conference room. Nobody questioned the grieving husband. Nobody questioned the carefully timed tears during his interview that morning. He had worn a black tie, left the top button slightly undone, allowed his voice to crack exactly once when speaking about Vivian. She struggled with anxiety after her health issues, he told reporters outside the resort. I tried to help her. I love my wife very much. America believed him instantly. Wealthy men with clean reputations always photographed, well beside tragedy. 3 days later, flowers covered the entrance of Whitmore Global. White roses, sympathy cards, social media tributes from celebrities and politicians who barely knew Vivian's name. Sabrina stood beside Damien during the memorial service wearing cream-colored Chanel and an expression carefully balanced between sorrow and support. To the public, she was only his executive consultant. Nothing more. But whispers still spread quietly through New York high society. Women noticed the way Sabrina touched Damien's arm too naturally. Men noticed the expensive bracelet Damien gifted her less than 2 weeks after the funeral. And somewhere beneath the polished condolences and marble hallways, rumors started breathing. Vivian's funeral itself remained closed casket, officially because of weather conditions and recovery difficulties in the canyon below. Unofficially because there was no body to bury. Damien insisted on proceeding anyway. She deserves peace, he told the funeral director calmly, while signing documents with a fountain pen worth more than most monthly mortgages. Vivian's mother cried through the entire service. Her younger sister, Chloe Monroe, barely looked at Damien at all. She sat stiffly in the front pew with red eyes and clenched fists while church organs echoed softly through St. Bartholomew Cathedral. Halfway through the ceremony, Chloe noticed something strange. Damien's phone kept vibrating. Again and again. He finally silenced it near the altar, but not before the screen lit up briefly in the dim cathedral light. Sabrina Kensington. Chloe saw the name clearly. Something cold settled into her stomach. Outside, reporters crowded against barricades while camera flashes exploded beneath cloudy skies. Mr. Whitmore, how are you coping with the loss? Will Whitmore Global delay the Ridgeline merger after your wife's passing? Damien adjusted his dark overcoat and lowered his eyes with practiced grief. Right now my focus is honoring Vivian's memory. It was a perfect answer. Controlled. Elegant. Empty. But later that same night, 2,000 miles away from New York, a black SUV rolled quietly through heavy fog along the Oregon coastline. Rain tapped softly against the windshield as Nathaniel Hayes Crawford drove toward a private medical facility hidden between pine forests and cliffs overlooking the Pacific. The security gate opened automatically. Inside room 17, machines beeped steadily beneath dim hospital lighting. Vivian Blake Monroe lay unconscious beneath white blankets, bruised ribs wrapped carefully, dark hair spread across sterile pillows, while ocean waves crashed faintly outside the windows. Doctors called her survival impossible. Nate Crawford called it unfinished business. He stood silently beside her bed for several seconds before placing a sealed evidence bag on the nightstand. Inside rested a silver wedding ring covered in dried rainwater and canyon dust. The same ring Damien Whitmore believed had vanished forever into the darkness below. The first thing Vivian heard was the sound of waves colliding against rock far below the hospital cliffs. Slow, rhythmic, relentless. Then came the machines. Steady electronic beeping cutting through the darkness behind her eyelids like distant alarms underwater. Her body felt impossibly heavy. Every breath burned through her ribs. Every movement dragged. Pain across muscles she could not remember damaging. Somewhere nearby, rain tapped softly against glass. Vivian tried to open her eyes and immediately regretted it. White light flooded her vision. Cold ceilings. Sterile walls. The sharp scent of antiseptic and ocean air mixed together. For several seconds, she could not understand where she was, or why her throat felt raw like she had swallowed broken glass. Then memory returned all at once. Damien. The cliff. The rain. The look in his eyes before her world disappeared beneath black sky and crashing wind. Her pulse monitor jumped violently. Easy. A calm male voice said from somewhere beside her bed. Your body is still recovering. Vivian turned her head slowly. The man standing near the window looked familiar in the strange way faces from old memories sometimes do. Tall, dark navy sweater, silver watch catching the pale morning light. His posture carried the quiet confidence of someone used to control without needing to announce it. Nathaniel Hayes Crawford. Nate. Damien's former business rival. The billionaire Damien once called dangerous. Vivian stared at him in confusion. How? Her voice cracked instantly. Nate stepped forward and handed her a glass of water carefully. Do not force it. She drank slowly while trying to steady her breathing. Why are you here? Nate looked toward the rain outside before answering. Because I found you. The room fell silent except for the machines. Vivian's fingers tightened weakly around the blanket. Damien said, her voice trembled again. Damien thought I was dead. Nate's jaw hardened almost invisibly. That was the idea. A cold chill moved through her chest stronger than the Oregon storm outside. Vivian closed her eyes as flashes returned in fragments. Damien reaching toward her near the cliff edge. His voice low and sharp beneath the thunder. You stopped being useful to me. Then the terrifying emptiness after the ground vanished beneath her feet. How long? She whispered. 3 weeks. Vivian's eyes opened immediately. 3. You were unconscious for most of it, Nate said carefully. Multiple fractures. Severe exposure. The doctors were not optimistic. He paused briefly before lowering his voice. But you survived. Survived. The words sounded strange inside her mind, like it belonged to someone else. Nate reached toward the nightstand and picked up a tablet. Without speaking, he turned the screen toward her. Headlines filled the display instantly. Whitmore Global CEO mourns tragic loss of wife. Socialite Sabrina Kensington supports family during heartbreaking funeral. Exclusive photos. Damien Whitmore returns to work after devastating accident. Vivian's stomach twisted violently. Then Nate opened another article. Her breath stopped. A photograph of Damien and Sabrina exiting a private Manhattan restaurant together filled the screen beneath flashing cameras. Sabrina smiled openly while Damien's hand rested against her back. The article timestamp read 5 days earlier. 5 days after her funeral. Vivian stared silently at the image while something inside her slowly cracked apart. Not loudly. Quietly. Completely. Nate studied her expression carefully. I debated showing you now. No. Vivian whispered without looking away from the screen. I needed to see it. Outside, thunder rolled across the Pacific again. Vivian lowered the tablet slowly into her lap. For the first time since waking up, tears gathered in her eyes. Not because Damien betrayed her. That pain already existed long before the cliff. No. This grief came from realizing how quickly the world erased her. Her marriage. Her loyalty. Her entire existence reduced to headlines and sympathy flowers, while Damien walked freely beside the woman he truly wanted all along. Nate spoke softly after a long silence. The police closed the investigation yesterday. Vivian looked at him sharply. What? Official ruling was accidental death due to severe weather conditions. He slid a thin folder across the blanket toward her. But accidents do not usually come with increased life insurance policies signed 6 months earlier. Vivian stared at the documents with trembling hands. Then slowly, painfully, something colder than heartbreak settled behind her eyes. For the first time since the cliff, she stopped looking like a victim. Winter arrived along the Oregon coast like a slow gray curtain, heavy with rain and silence. 4 months after the cliff, Vivian Blake Monroe stood alone inside a private rehabilitation gym overlooking the Pacific Ocean, gripping the metal railing of a treadmill while cold morning light spilled across polished floors. Her breathing came hard. Sweat dampened the collar of her black training jacket. Every muscle in her body trembled from exhaustion, but she refused to stop walking. 1 mile, then another, then another. The physical therapist called her progress remarkable. Nate Crawford called it survival. Vivian called it punishment. Because every step hurt. Not only her healing body, but the memories trapped inside it. Some nights, she still woke gasping after dreaming about rain and falling darkness. Other nights, she heard Damien's voice so clearly, she could almost feel his breath against her ear again. You stopped being useful to me. The words followed her everywhere. Through therapy sessions. Through endless medical scans. Through mornings when she stared into mirrors and barely recognized the woman staring back. The weight she once carried disappeared gradually during surgeries, recovery, and months of controlled nutrition designed to rebuild her damaged body. Her face sharpened. Her posture changed. The softness Damien used to mock transformed into quiet strength hidden beneath tailored coats and disciplined silence. But the biggest change was inside her eyes. They no longer searched rooms hoping to be loved. They measured exits, risks, intentions. One rainy afternoon, Vivian sat inside Nate's oceanfront library wrapped in a cream blanket while financial reports covered the glass table before her. Wall Street tickers glowed across massive television screens mounted above dark oak shelves. Nate stood near the fireplace reading quietly while jazz piano drifted through hidden speakers. "I never understood any of this before," Vivian admitted softly while staring at stock charts and acquisition documents. Nate looked up from his tablet. Damien understood it very well. Vivian's expression hardened instantly. "That is exactly why I need to learn." Nate studied her for several seconds. "Most people in your situation would disappear. Start over somewhere quiet." Vivian closed the folder slowly. "And spend the rest of my life wondering if he ever regretted it." Outside, waves slammed violently against the cliffs below the estate. Nate walked toward the window before answering. "Men like Damien do not regret. They calculate." The room fell silent. Vivian lowered her eyes toward the financial reports again. Whitmore global stock prices flashed across the screen. Strong, expanding, untouchable. Damien had become even more successful after her death. Interviews praised his resilience. Business magazines called him America's most disciplined executive under pressure. Sabrina appeared beside him constantly now. Red carpet events, charity galas, luxury vacations photographed from yachts along the Amalfi Coast. The public adored them. Vivian watched every image quietly, every interview, every smile, every lie, until one evening, nearly 8 months after the cliff, Nate entered the library holding a thin black folder with an expression colder than usual. "What is it?" Vivian asked immediately. Nate placed the folder on the table. "Private investigators finally recovered footage from a tourist vehicle near Blackthorn Ridge the night you disappeared." Vivian felt her pulse quicken instantly. Nate opened the folder slowly. Several still photographs slid across the glass table. Grainy, rain-covered, but unmistakable. Damien standing dangerously close beside her near the cliff edge. Sabrina's white SUV parked farther down the road. Timestamped. Legally admissible. Vivian stared at the images without blinking. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Nate reached into his coat pocket and placed something else beside the photographs. A folded newspaper clipping from New York. Manhattan Charity Gala to honor top business leaders. Damien Whitmore featured prominently across the front page beside Sabrina's polished smile. Vivian picked up the clipping carefully. Piano music drifted softly through the room while thunder rolled outside over the Pacific. "You once asked me why I saved you," Nate said quietly behind her. Vivian looked up slowly. Nate's expression remained calm, unreadable. "Because I spent 7 years watching Damien destroy everyone around him while pretending to be respectable." He paused briefly. "And I realized something after finding you beneath that cliff." Vivian's fingers tightened around the newspaper. "What?" Nate's eyes darkened slightly. "The only thing more dangerous than a powerful man is the woman he failed to finish destroying." For the first time since waking up in Oregon, Vivian smiled without warmth. 3 years after the night Blackthorn Ridge almost buried her forever, Vivian Blake Monroe returned to New York wearing a black silk gown worth more than the apartment she once shared with Damien Whitmore when they were still pretending to be happy. Snow drifted slowly across Manhattan as black SUVs lined the entrance of the Astoria Grand Hotel, their headlights reflecting against wet pavement while reporters crowded behind velvet barricades. Camera flashes exploded across the marble entrance every few seconds. Billionaires, senators, Wall Street royalty. Everyone important attended the Whitmore Foundation Winter Gala because Damien Whitmore had spent years building himself into the kind of man America admired. Disciplined, elegant, untouchable. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of guests dressed in diamonds and dark tuxedos, while a live orchestra played soft jazz beneath gold ceilings. Waiters moved silently through the crowd carrying champagne on silver trays. Damien stood near the center of the ballroom, speaking confidently with investors, one hand resting casually in his pocket, while Sabrina Kensington leaned against him in a fitted emerald gown that photographers could not stop capturing. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, touched his arm too often. Everything about her screamed victory. Then the ballroom doors opened. The change in the room happened almost invisibly at first. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. One violinist missed a note. Vivian stepped inside beneath the glow of chandelier light with calm, measured steps that echoed softly across the marble floor. Black satin gloves, diamond earrings catching flashes from cameras. Her dark hair swept elegantly over one shoulder. Thin now, sharp now, untouchable in an entirely different way. For 3 seconds, nobody recognized her. Then Damien looked up. The champagne glass in his hand froze halfway to his lips. Color drained slowly from his face as if someone had pulled oxygen from the room itself. Sabrina followed his stare, confused at first, until realization hit her all at once. Her smile disappeared instantly. Vivian did not stop walking. Behind her, Nathaniel Crawford entered the ballroom in a tailored midnight suit surrounded by private security and investment executives from Crawford Capital. Whispers spread through the gala like electricity. That is impossible. She died. Oh my God, that is Vivian Whitmore. Damien stared at her, as if seeing a ghost step out of his own nightmare. Vivian finally stopped near the center staircase beneath the massive crystal chandelier where every camera angle in the room could see her clearly. The orchestra fell silent. Even the photographers seemed unsure whether they should keep shooting. Then Vivian smiled softly. Calm, controlled, dangerous. Good evening, she said. Her voice carried perfectly across the ballroom. Damien moved toward her immediately, his polished composure cracking beneath visible panic for the first time in years. Vivian, the word barely escaped his throat. Up close, he looked older than she remembered. The confidence remained, but fear had finally found its place beneath his eyes. Vivian tilted her head slightly. You look surprised. Sabrina stepped forward quickly beside Damien, her expression tightening behind forced elegance. This is some kind of sick joke. Vivian's eyes moved toward her slowly. No, she replied quietly. What happened 3 years ago was the joke. The tension inside the ballroom became unbearable. Phones appeared discreetly beneath tables. Guests whispered behind champagne glasses. Across the room, reporters near the entrance were already sending frantic texts to newsrooms. Damien lowered his voice immediately. We need to talk privately. Vivian almost laughed at the absurdity of it. 3 years earlier, he could not wait for her to disappear forever. Now, his entire body radiated desperation. Nate approached calmly beside her, one hand adjusting the cuff of his watch. Actually, he said smoothly, we are here for the shareholder announcement. Damien's expression darkened instantly. What announcement? Nate handed a thin folder toward him. Damien opened it quickly while Sabrina leaned closer to read. The blood drained from both their faces simultaneously. Crawford Capital had quietly acquired 32% of Whitmore Global through offshore transactions over the last 18 months. Vivian now controlled more voting shares than anyone else in the company except Damien himself. The ballroom lights suddenly felt colder. Vivian watched the panic settle behind Damien's eyes and realized something important. The man who once looked down at her from the edge of a cliff was finally afraid. The internet exploded before midnight. By the time Vivian Blake Monroe stepped out of the Astoria Grand Hotel beneath falling snow and flashing cameras, her face already dominated every major news feed in America. Dead socialite returns at billionaire gala. Whitmore CEO shocked as presumed dead wife appears alive. The clips spread faster than stock market rumors. Damien standing frozen beneath crystal chandeliers. Sabrina visibly panicking beside him. Vivian calm as winter itself while reporters screamed questions from behind barricades. Inside the black SUV leaving the gala, Nate sat beside Vivian in silence while Manhattan lights blurred across rain-covered windows. Her phone vibrated constantly on the leather seat beside her. Unknown numbers, news outlets, financial analysts, former friends who vanished after her funeral suddenly desperate to reconnect. Vivian ignored every notification. Her eyes stayed fixed on the city outside. Somewhere beneath those glowing towers, Damien Whitmore was unraveling. The thought should have satisfied her. Instead, she felt strangely empty. You expected revenge to feel better, Nate said quietly without looking at her. Vivian glanced toward him. Is it that obvious? Nate gave the faintest smile. I spent years watching powerful men collapse. The first crack never feels as good as people. Imagine, back at Whitmore Tower, panic spread across executive floors before sunrise. Emergency board meetings began at 6:30 in the morning. Lawyers flooded conference rooms carrying stacks of legal binders, while financial advisors argued over acquisition exposure and shareholder vulnerability. Damien stood at the center of it all, wearing the same dark suit from the gala, his tie loosened slightly, exhaustion carved sharply beneath his eyes. But beneath the stress, something else had appeared. Fear. Real fear. How did Crawford buy this much stock without triggering alarms? Damien snapped while pacing beside the conference table. Nobody answered immediately. The silence only made him angrier. Across the room, giant monitors displayed collapsing headlines and plunging investor confidence. Whitmore Global under investigation after shareholder surprise. Analysts question timeline of CEO wife's presumed death. Sabrina entered the room 20 minutes late wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy morning. Her composure from the gala had vanished completely. "There are reporters outside my building," she hissed immediately. "Someone leaked photos from St. Lucia. They are asking when our relationship actually started." Damien barely looked at her. "Then deny it." Sabrina stared at him in disbelief. "You think this is still manageable?" Damien finally turned toward her sharply. "Everything is manageable." But even he no longer sounded convinced. At the same moment, 30 blocks away inside Crawford Capital headquarters, Vivian sat quietly at the end of a polished conference table while attorneys reviewed documents around her. The room overlooked Central Park beneath cold January skies. Coffee steamed beside untouched legal folders. "We can force a special shareholder hearing within 10 business days," one attorney explained carefully. "But once this becomes criminal instead of civil, the board will move independently to protect itself." Vivian listened silently. "Criminal." The words settled heavily in the room. Nate stood near the windows, speaking into his phone before ending the call abruptly. His expression darkened slightly. "You should see this." He handed Vivian a tablet. A live news segment filled the screen immediately. Damien Whitmore stood outside corporate headquarters, surrounded by microphones and camera flashes. Calm, controlled, beautifully rehearsed. "My wife has clearly experienced severe trauma," Damien told reporters smoothly. "Right now my only concern is protecting her privacy and mental health." Vivian almost laughed. Then Damien delivered the line that changed everything. "Certain individuals appear to be manipulating her emotional condition for financial purposes." Vivian's smile disappeared instantly. Nate watched her carefully. "He is trying to make you look unstable." Vivian lowered the tablet slowly onto the table. For several seconds, she said nothing at all. The attorney stopped speaking. Even the room itself seemed to quiet around her. Finally, Vivian stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Snow drifted slowly between skyscrapers below. Somewhere out there, Damien still believed reputation could save him. That charm could rewrite truth. That power could control the story forever. Vivian folded her arms calmly. "Then we stopped playing defense." Nate studied her reflection in the glass. "What are you thinking?" Vivian's eyes hardened like ice beneath city light. "I think it is time the world learns what actually happened at Blackthorn Ridge." At that exact moment, 3 federal investigators walked into Whitmore Global carrying sealed subpoenas. The first federal subpoena hit Damien Whitmore during a live interview on national television. 1 second, he was sitting beneath studio lights, discussing corporate resilience with practiced confidence. The next, a producer rushed onto the set whispering frantically into the anchor's earpiece, while cameras abruptly cut to commercial. Damien's expression did not collapse immediately. Men like him trained their faces too carefully for that. But viewers still noticed the subtle change when leaked behind-the-scenes footage appeared online less than an hour later. The tightness around his mouth. The flicker of panic behind controlled eyes. America noticed everything now. Across Manhattan, giant digital billboards rotated between stock market ads and breaking headlines. Federal investigation expands into Whitmore Global Finances. Mystery surrounds executive's wife return. News helicopters circled above corporate towers, while financial analysts debated whether Whitmore Global could survive another week of scandal. Inside Crawford Capital headquarters, Vivian Blake Monroe watched the chaos unfold from a silent conference room 27 floors above the city. Rain streaked slowly across the windows while muted television screens replayed Damien's interview repeatedly. Nate entered carrying another stack of legal documents. 3 board members resigned this morning, he said calmly. Vivian barely looked away from the screen. And Sabrina? Nate tossed a thin folder onto the glass table. She hired her own attorneys 2 hours ago. That finally caught Vivian's attention. Nate opened the file slowly, revealing photographs from the previous night. Sabrina leaving Whitmore Tower through a private underground entrance wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying 2 suitcases. Another image showed her entering a downtown law office at nearly midnight. She is preparing to save herself, Nate said quietly. Vivian leaned back slowly in her chair. Good. Outside the conference room, assistants moved quickly through hallways carrying sealed evidence boxes while investigators interviewed former Whitmore executives one by one. The empire Damien built through intimidation and image control was beginning to crack from the inside. And the worst part for him was this. Vivian never raised her voice once. Later that evening, rain covered Manhattan in silver reflections while Damien sat alone inside his penthouse office overlooking Central Park. The room smelled faintly of whiskey and expensive leather. His tie hung loose beside an untouched drink while multiple television screens filled the darkness with non-stop coverage of the investigation. Every network used the same photograph now. Vivian stepping into the Gala beneath chandelier light, looking calm enough to terrify people. Damien stared at the image too long. Then his secure phone rang. Sabrina. He answered instantly. Where are you? Silence lingered for half a second before her voice came through tight with panic. They questioned me today. Damien closed his eyes briefly. What did you say? Nothing. But she sounded uncertain. Weak. Dangerous. Damien stood slowly from his desk and walked toward the windows overlooking the storm-covered city. Listen to me carefully, he said quietly. If you panic now, you destroy both of us. Sabrina laughed nervously on the other end. You think we still survive this? Damien's reflection stared back at him from the glass. Older now. Colder. Cornered. Vivian is bluffing, he replied sharply. She has no proof. The moment the words left his mouth, someone knocked once on his office door before entering without permission. Damien turned immediately. One of his attorneys stood frozen near the entrance, pale-faced and breathing hard. Sir, Damien's stomach tightened instantly. What? The attorney swallowed visibly. State investigators recovered footage from Blackthorn Ridge. Silence. Complete silence. Even the rain outside seemed to disappear for one impossible second. Sabrina's voice crackled faintly through the phone speaker. Damien. He lowered the phone slowly from his ear. How much footage? The attorney hesitated. That hesitation alone was enough. Damien finally understood something terrifying. This was no longer a scandal. It was a timeline. And timelines could destroy men faster than rumors ever could. Across the city, Vivian stood alone inside Nate's penthouse library wearing a black silk blouse while thunder rolled outside the windows. In her hands rested the recovered dashcam stills from Blackthorn Ridge. Grainy images frozen forever in rain and darkness. Damien near the cliff edge. Herself stepping backward. Sabrina's SUV waiting farther down the road like part of a carefully arranged ending. Nate approached quietly beside her. The district attorney wants to move quickly. Vivian stared at the photographs without blinking. No, she said softly. Nate looked at her. No. Vivian lowered the images carefully onto the table beside her wedding ring. I waited 3 years to come back from the dead. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the storm outside Manhattan. Cold now. Fearless now. He does not get to disappear quietly. The courtroom lights felt colder than hospital lights. Sharper too. Every polished surface inside Manhattan Federal Court reflected tension back at the hundreds of people packed shoulder to shoulder across the gallery. Reporters lined the walls holding phones and tablets ready while camera crews waited outside for the verdict everyone in America already sensed coming. Damien Whitmore sat at the defense table wearing a navy suit tailored perfectly enough to almost hide how badly his hands trembled. Almost. Beside him, his attorneys whispered urgently over stacks of legal documents while federal prosecutors prepared exhibits beneath harsh fluorescent light. Across the aisle, Sabrina Kensington avoided eye contact with everyone. Her once flawless public image had collapsed completely during the last 48 hours. No designer gowns now. No polished smiles. Just exhaustion beneath heavy makeup and fear behind lowered eyes. Then the courtroom doors opened. Vivian Blake Monroe entered wearing a cream wool coat over black silk, her posture calm and straight beneath the weight of 1,000 staring eyes. Conversation stopped immediately. Even reporters forgot to type for a second. Damien looked up slowly from the defense table and froze the moment he saw her. 3 years earlier, he believed the cliff erased her forever. Now she walked toward him looking stronger than anyone in the room. Nathaniel Crawford followed several steps behind alongside federal investigators and attorneys carrying sealed evidence cases. The judge entered moments later. "Be seated." Nobody truly relaxed. The prosecution moved quickly. Financial records first. Hidden offshore accounts. The increased insurance policy. Internal Whitmore global transfers tied to suspicious shell corporations. Damien's attorneys fought every point aggressively, but cracks were already spreading beneath the surface. Then prosecutors called Sabrina Kensington to the stand. The courtroom shifted instantly. Sabrina walked forward carefully, her heels clicking sharply against marble floors while reporters leaned closer with open notebooks. Damien watched her the entire time. Not with love, not even anger, just disbelief. The kind powerful men feel when they realize loyalty was always temporary. Sabrina sat beneath the courtroom lights and adjusted the microphone with shaking fingers. "Miss Kensington," the prosecutor began calmly, "did you know Damien Whitmore intended to end his marriage before the incident at Blackthorn Ridge?" Sabrina swallowed visibly. "Yes." Damien's jaw tightened. The prosecutor continued. "Did Mr. Whitmore discuss financial benefits connected to Vivian Monroe's death?" Silence stretched across the courtroom. Sabrina closed her eyes briefly before answering. "Yes." Gasps rippled softly through the gallery. Damien leaned forward instantly. "Sabrina." His voice came low and dangerous enough that the judge immediately interrupted. "Mr. Whitmore, you will remain silent." Sabrina stared down at her hands while tears gathered carefully in her eyes. "He said everything would finally belong to us," she whispered. "The company, the insurance money, the future." Damien looked physically ill now. Sweat gathered beneath his collar despite the freezing courtroom air. But the worst moment still waited ahead. The prosecutor nodded toward federal technicians standing near the evidence monitor. "Your Honor, the state would now like to present recovered footage from Blackthorn Ridge Resort recorded the night Vivian Monroe disappeared." The entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Grainy footage filled the massive courtroom screen immediately. Rain. Darkness. The overlook near the canyon. Vivian standing near the cliff edge in her blue anniversary dress, while Damien faced her only feet away. There was no audio. None was needed. The jury watched Damien step closer, watched Vivian move backward, watched her disappear beyond the edge of the frame seconds later, while Damien remained standing perfectly still in the rain. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Damien closed his eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked defeated. Completely defeated. Across the courtroom, Vivian never looked away from the screen once. The prosecutor lowered his voice. Carefully, "Mr. Whitmore, would you like to explain why you failed to contact emergency responders for nearly 47 minutes after your wife disappeared?" Damien said nothing. The silence destroyed him more effectively than any confession could have. Outside the courthouse, thunder rolled over Manhattan while reporters waited beneath flashing cameras and cold rain. Inside, the judge reviewed final motions slowly before speaking words that would end Damien Whitmore's empire forever. Based on the evidence presented before this court, the defendant will remain in federal custody pending formal criminal proceedings. Gasps erupted instantly. Reporters rushed toward exits. Lawyers shouted over each other. Sabrina broke down quietly at the witness stand. Through all the chaos, Damien only looked at Vivian. Not angry now. Not arrogant. Just hollow. As federal officers approached him, he stood slowly from the defense table. "Vivian." Her name sounded fragile in his mouth for the first time ever. Vivian walked toward him calmly until only a few feet separated them beneath cold courtroom lights. Damien's eyes filled with desperate regret. "I never thought," Vivian stopped him softly, "that I would survive." The room fell silent around them. Damien lowered his head. Vivian studied him for one long moment before speaking quietly enough that only he could hear. "You did not destroy me on that cliff, Damien." Her eyes never blinked. "You created the woman who came back." 6 months after the courtroom exploded across every television screen in America, spring returned to Manhattan with cold rain and pale silver skies. Whitmore Global no longer existed in the form Damien Whitmore once worshipped. The board dismantled his control within weeks of the federal investigation. Executives vanished quietly through private resignations. Investors fled. Magazine covers that once praised Damien's discipline now called him a symbol of corporate narcissism and calculated betrayal. Even the Astoria Grand Hotel removed his portrait from the charity hall, where he once hosted million-dollar galas beneath crystal chandeliers. Public memory could be brutal when power stopped protecting a man. Vivian Blake Monroe watched all of it happen from a distance she once believed impossible to reach. On the 49th floor of Crawford Capital's new Manhattan headquarters, she stood alone beside massive windows overlooking the skyline, while thunder rolled softly beyond the Hudson River. The city glowed beneath evening rain. Yellow taxi lights blurred across wet streets. Helicopters drifted between skyscrapers like shadows moving through fog. Somewhere far below, people rushed home carrying umbrellas, completely unaware of how many lives had shattered behind the polished glass towers surrounding them. Vivian rested one hand lightly against the cool window beside her while soft piano music played through hidden speakers. 3 years earlier, she stood on a cliff believing love could still save her marriage. Now she understood something far colder. Love had never been the thing Damien valued most. Control was. Reputation was. Winning was. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Nate entered carrying 2 cups of coffee in ceramic mugs. "Still raining," he said softly. Vivian accepted the coffee with a faint smile. New York always looks more honest in bad weather. Nate leaned casually against the marble counter nearby, studying her carefully the way he always did now. Not as someone fragile, not as someone broken, just someone who survived something most people never truly recover from. The district attorney confirmed the final sentencing hearing this morning, he said quietly. Vivian nodded once. No celebration crossed her face. No satisfaction either. Nate noticed immediately. "You thought revenge would close the wound." Vivian stared out at the skyline for a long moment before answering. "I thought hearing him lose everything would feel louder." Outside, lightning flashed briefly across the clouds. Nate stepped closer beside her. And Vivian looked down toward the wedding ring resting on the windowsill near her untouched files. The same silver ring recovered beside the cliff years earlier. She had kept it all this time not as a symbol of love, but as proof of who she used to be. "Turns out peace is quieter than revenge," she whispered. Later that evening, Vivian walked alone onto the rooftop terrace above the building while wind swept rain across the concrete skyline. The city stretched endlessly around her in gold and silver reflections beneath storm clouds. Somewhere downtown, Damien Whitmore sat inside a federal holding facility waiting for sentencing beside the ruins of the empire he sacrificed everything to protect. Sabrina Kensington had disappeared from public life entirely after cooperating with prosecutors. The headlines moved on slowly, just like they always did. But Vivian remained standing. That was the difference. Her phone vibrated softly inside her coat pocket. Chloe Monroe had sent a message containing only 4 words. Mom finally smiled again. Vivian closed her eyes briefly as emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. After everything Damien stole, after all the years she spent shrinking herself to survive his approval, that message somehow mattered more than the courtroom verdict ever could. Footsteps approached behind her quietly. Nate joined her near the edge of the rooftop, hands tucked into the pockets of his dark coat, while city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The rain softened around them into a cold mist drifting above Manhattan. Finally, Nate looked toward her and asked the question he had carried silently for months. "Do you feel avenged?" Vivian watched the skyline carefully before answering. Not the towers, not the traffic, the horizon beyond all of it. Calm settled across her face slowly, replacing the rage that once kept her alive. "No," she said softly. "I feel free." Somewhere below them, distant sirens echoed through the city while rain washed against glass and steel. Vivian lifted the old wedding ring one final time, studying the faint scratches left by years of pretending to belong to someone who never truly valued her heart. Then she placed it quietly on the rooftop ledge and walked away without looking back. Because some men spend their lives trying to break a woman into something smaller, only to discover too late that surviving them made her impossible to control ever again.